Hello, and welcome back to the Diogenes Podcast. The following essay is from my forthcoming book, The Disasters of Woke, Manichean Dreams in Words and Pictures. It is adapted from a letter I sent to my son's middle school principal in 2022. Chew on this. Nitty Gritty. Quote, I find this error fascinating. After all, we make the mistake in anticipation of a sound as yet unsaid, thus indicating how our brain monitors language before the fact of expression. Isn't the form of the error also remarkable? End quote. That was Stephen Jay Gould from The Mismeasure of Man. Recently, my son shared troubling details about his 6th grade civic engagement and action class, something he has done virtually every day since school began this fall. Apparently, during story time, an African-American student related how one of his teachers still struggles to remember his name. On my son's account, the civics teacher, Mrs. C, seized the moment to discuss the importance of ethnicity, emphasis hers, and respect for identity, and proclaimed that this was a microaggression, presumably of the racist variety, committed by the other teacher, and that it was all she could do to hold herself back from leaving the class and going to scream at her colleague. She also told the class that she would be bringing this up at the next faculty meeting. Okay. 1. Why is a teacher expressing such acrimony toward a colleague in front of their mutual students? This should be seen as unprofessional and unacceptable, except that everyone now seems to have the moral license to rage at will when oppression is in the air. 2. Why is she jumping to conclusions about the nature of the teacher's mistake? I think I know why. Because woke ideology is tautological. It's an act of oppression if she says so. Intentions don't matter, only feelings. Also, the students were required to read the social justice graphic novel New Kid, which is effectively oppression for dummies. White teacher misremembers black student's name? Textbook case. 3. What kind of pedagogy is this, and what is the purpose of this class? My wife and I remain baffled by the presumption of academic relevance in what is obviously a kind of social justice catechism. Everything our son has told us about civic engagement and action reveals that this is nothing other than grievance stoking. In one of the first classes, Mrs. C used story time to talk about her ex-husband and how their daughter is uncomfortable going to visit him and finding his girlfriend's clothing lying around the house. Talk about airing your dirty laundry. How is this a lesson in anything other than being petty and vindictive, not to mention oversharing personal details and elevating them to the level of communal indignity? This class seems less about celebrating diversity than celebrating adversity. It seems less about common cause than common enemy. It seems to be validating in students the tendency to interpret everything in the worst way possible, and then encouraging them to publicly broadcast and denounce those whom they perceive as having attempted to harm them, and inevitably attributing their motives to bigotry. While the civic engagement class conceivably comes from a good place, as practiced, it is neither effective nor appropriate as an academic component in the education of my son. It is no school's prerogative to inculcate morals or dispense instructions for proper political conduct. I do not accept the propositions on which this class is founded, except in the most general sense that getting along with others is good and necessary and makes the world a better place. In 1979, I attended the R.L. Brown 6th Grade Center in Jacksonville, Florida. This was during the height of busing. It was an hour-long ride from my neighborhood to the school, which was near the center of the city in a poor, predominantly black area. The school, as I remember it, was a brutalist cube enclosed with a high chain-link fence surmounted with barbed wire. One afternoon, we had a break in our schedule to see a play in the cafeteria. It was an avant-garde interpretation of the Adam and Eve story from the book of Genesis. There were 3 actors, 2 men and a woman, and no dialogue. The story was told entirely through the graceful and powerful movements of the players. Although I already considered myself an atheist, I remember being moved by the performance and impressed by the abilities of the actors to convey so much meaning and emotion through minimal costumes and staging, and in total silence. When we returned to our class, our always stern social studies teacher, Mr. D, paced up and down the room, clenching his jaw and his fists. After a long interval, he spoke through gritted teeth without turning to look at us. He said, incidentally, he was always saying incidentally, it should be considered an absolute sacrilege that God should ever be portrayed by a black man. It felt like the floor had fallen out of the room. My heart battered against my ribs. I looked around and into the faces of my friends and classmates, more than half of whom were black, and read the silent emotion in their eyes. I wanted to say something. I wanted to tell Mr. D that he was a son of a bitch and that I wasn't coming back to his class ever again. But I didn't say that. I didn't say anything. I was afraid. Mr. D then left the room for a few minutes, and I found the courage to say to my classmates what they already knew. That was wrong. A few of them made eye contact, one or two people nodded, but most just stared blankly ahead or toward the floor. Then the teacher returned and we went on with our studies. I regretted not speaking up that afternoon for over 40 years. That blatant display of bigotry and dominance by a teacher to his students, to children, was one of the ugliest things I had seen up to that point in my life. It was a hard lesson learned, but I now know how to speak and when to speak up, and I'm not afraid of much, unless it is the fear of my child having to marinate in the same pedagogical excrement of self-righteous, cultish contempt in the name of identity. What was great about that play was that the actors, black and white, male and female, were participating in telling a shared story, an origin story of which all were a part. It didn't require that the right words be pronounced in the right way at the right time for the meaning to be clear. The eloquence was in their actions. And however one feels about Bible stories, unlike certain other religions of the moment, this one does at least have a redemption narrative. A Google search revealed that my alma mater is now the R.L. Brown Gifted and Talented Academy. This sounds encouraging until one sees that the school has a minority enrollment of 93%, half of whom test below proficiency in math and reading. I submit that this has nothing to do with the students' names or the color of their skin, but with the cultural prioritizing that has replaced universal standards for reading, writing, and arithmetic with the 3 R's of woke: relativism, resentment, and revolution. Add to this the woke proclivity for renaming things to make them sound better or worse than they actually are, depending upon the ideological imperative of the moment. Students don't lag because a teacher misremembered or misgendered them, although they may when they are told that their historic grievances are their greatest attributes: gifted and talented. The most unpronounceable word in the West now is progress, which, incidentally, we will never make if we keep looking backward. Quote, in the first place, it was firmly and sincerely believed that there was no other way in which society could get along except the many pulled at the rope and the few rode, and not only this, but that no very radical improvement even was possible. End quote. Edward Bellamy, Looking Backward.